with regards to what you said about being an agnostic, saying that you're a former Catholic, and you said that I was reasonable in that conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you that in terms of Speaker's Corner, people like myself come here because we have an ideology that we want to share, and we want to invite people to consider that ideology and to embrace it in that worldview. You know, I don't meet many agnostics here at Speaker's Corner. We tend to be a shy group, you know, because I guess it's logical because you have no reason to proselytize. If you're saying that we don't know, you just have a reason to defend. So, what was it that led you to sort of like an agnostic perspective?
Lots of doubts, things that I couldn't be sure of.
Yeah.
Looking into the historicity of, I guess you're Christian.
Yeah.
Are you denominational?
No, not denominational.
Are you just general Christian?
Just a Christian.
Trying to find out what I could be sure of in the Bible and what I could be uncertain of.
Right.
There's a lot of things that I was sure of.
Yeah.
Like that Jesus existed.
Yeah.
Like that he died under Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
Probably crucified.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of Christians following him.
Yeah.
That I can be pretty sure of because it's backed up by non-Christian sources.
Yeah.
When it comes to him actually being divine, I demand a lot of evidence to be able to be convinced of that.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find it.
Yeah, I think in terms of evidence, there's plenty of evidence that he said he was divine. There's evidence that others said he was divine,
I'm not sure.
and there was evidence that his enemies said that he was divine.
So what kind of enemies are you talking about?
So, for example, the high priest at his trial, I take it you know the account of Christ's at his trial with the high priest. You wouldn't exactly call the people that are pushing for Christ to be crucified his friends, would you?
So the thing I have about when I say that I'm sure that he died under Pontius Pilate, I say so because of people like Josephus, Pliny the Younger, and those kinds of people. I don't say so because it's written in the Bible.
Why do you dismiss the biblical evidence?
I'm trying to find different corroborations of it, and whenever things fall in line with the biblical evidence, then I say, okay, this makes sense.
Okay, but explain to me the logic of accepting Josephus, but rejecting Matthew. So they're both historical documents. They were both written around the period of the occurrence, though Matthew was written earlier than Josephus. They both made claims about the Christ. So why do you accept Josephus but reject Matthew?
I think because Josephus has no vested interest in saying that Christianity was a thing, or that Jesus existed, while Matthew has a vested interest because that's his religious belief. Yeah.
So, do you think that people that write history, whilst we both agree, so we can get this out of the way, that anyone who writes history is going to be writing from a perspective?
Yeah, there's always bias.
Always bias. Always bias. But as historians, we wouldn't reject historical documents just because they're written from bias, because we accept that all historical documents are written from bias.
Yes, but we would take them with a pinch of salt and make sure that other people agree with this main source.
It's not true that we would take them with a pinch of salt. What we would do is we would approach them with a degree of caution that would allow us to sift and to filter them based upon cross-referencing with other sources.
What's the difference between that and the pinch of salt?
That's roughly what I meant.
Well, I mean, then I would encourage you to try and be a bit more clinical with your language to avoid, because such pictorial metaphors are not helpful if they don't come with commentary, because they're subjective. In terms of this filtering process, what kind of things are we looking for in terms of historical source documents as evidence to historical events?
So I look for non-Christian sources that have no vested interest. So be they Roman, be they Jewish. I think those have a lot of credibility.
Okay.
I think one of the issues I have with taking the Bible as historical evidence is that it makes a great deal of claims.
Yeah.
And if you're going to say this is historical evidence, you have to apply that to the whole document.
Yes.
I don't think you can be
The whole of
partial
humanity.
the whole document.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Carry on.
Go on, I don't want to...
And that's a great deal you need to agree with. I mean, there's miracles in there, there's resurrection, there's some dodgy passages.
I would suggest to you that your criterion is deficient. What you should be looking for are multiple sources from multiple origins. You should be looking for the earliest possible sources, and then you should be looking for corroborating sources.
Right.
But all you've done is look for corroborating sources, and you have seemingly a priori dismissed the Christian sources based upon what?
Basically, I've taken them with caution.
Right.
And I've said, if I find corroborating evidence that isn't Christian, then I'll take it.
Yep.
Or I'll accept it. So I can accept bits of the Bible.
Yep.
But with the Bible, you either take it all, you accept all, or you accept none of it.
Well, I mean, firstly, we mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that you must believe all of it literally, because the Bible is not written to be believed completely literally in every case.
I would talk about the New Testament.
Yeah, even in the New Testament, there are aspects of the New Testament that are not meant to be taken literally. You look at the revelation of John writing in the Apocalypse or in the book of the Revelations. These kind of imageries are not literal.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear which is supposed to be taken.
Exactly. So, but in terms of our criterion of evidence, what you have is, and this is the kind of argument that Bruce Metzger would use, who is a biblical historian, a textual scholar of the Bible, that you have a collection that was put together much later by the church of documents created independently of one another that all point to the same origin, which is that something fundamentally happened that convinced the first Christians that Christ had risen from the dead.
So I've gone as far as saying that something mysterious, something special happened at that point.
Yeah. So let me ask you directly.
Yeah.
What do you think could have happened to convince the very, very first Christians, i.e. the people that had no one else to tell them, that Christ had risen from the dead, and so convinced them that they then went around telling other people?
We actually call ourselves the anti-institution.
So I think they were probably honest in their belief that they actually believed it.
Yep.
Because they accepted to be martyrs for it.
Yep.
I would think that Jesus also honestly believed it.
Yep.
I think there is a great deal of things you can honestly believe and be wrong about.
Yep.
If the healing the lepers and so on actually happened, then that would explain one way of having such a belief.
Yep. You do know that some of the earlier sources that you quoted, like Tacitus, Josephus, Flavius, they do describe Christ as a miracle worker.
I'd be interested to see that.
Yeah, you should go and see that. You should go and see
so who in particular?
The truth is, I can't remember which one it is, whether it's Flavius, Tacitus, or Josephus, so I'm not going to get it named. I would just encourage you to look at it.
Okay.
And they do describe Christ as a miracle worker. They describe him as someone who worked miracles.
Josephus, I think you're talking about Josephus, because there's two sections.
I can't remember the name, so I'm not going to say.
Because there's one section of Josephus.
I promise you, on YouTube, someone will put it in the comment section. It will appear.
There's one section of Josephus that was probably rewritten by Christians later on down the line.
Yeah, that is the opinion of some historians.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And one that's taken as trustworthy.
What I noticed though is that you haven't directly addressed my question. My question to you is very simple.
Yeah, I didn't finish answering.
Yes. What convinced the very first Christians that Christ had risen from the dead, so much so that they then went on to tell other people about it?
I think it's very possible that he can create a philosophy that's so compelling that people would then convert, and that the miracle was an invention after the fact. But
Yeah.
So, for example, the first time I was in Speaker's Corner,
Yeah.
I met a Christian
Okay.
who had, well, not really a Christian. He was part of some kind of cult, and he had been convinced by somebody in Spain that convinced him and his family to go around the world, including Speaker's Corner, and get people to come back in Spain to this cult leader. And he had basically understood the Old Testament completely differently than mainline Christianity.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he'd go as far as saying this person was a miracle worker.
Yeah.
But he had definitely been taken in by somebody who probably had an incredible charisma.
Yeah. You've still not answered my question.
No, but I'm
Actually,
thinking something like that might
sorry,
happen.
but he addressed my question much more directly than you did, so allow me to respond to you. You said that is it possible that Christ created such a philosophy that was absorbed by the first apostles that the idea of the resurrection could be a later sort of bolt-on retrospectively. Now, and this is what I always find with people who reject the idea of the actual resurrection of Christ, is, particularly amongst agnostics and atheists, is that they demand evidence from Christians. Provide me your evidence that Christ created a philosophy that resulted in the later add-on creation of the invention of the resurrection. Where's your evidence?
well, that's actually the null hypothesis.
It's an hypothesis. Where's your evidence?
A null hypothesis, as in with the absence of evidence, you assume that there is nothing there. So the creation of the story, that would be a hypothesis. In terms of like how that story came about, there's an evidence for that. There's just.
But the point is, you said in the absence of evidence.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to give you evidence to the contrary.
Okay.
So, I don't know if you guys know, but the order of the Bible is not the order in which it was written. The New Testament letters were written before the Gospels.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you aware of that?
Yeah.
Okay. And 1 Corinthians 15 is argued by historians like Mike Licona, like Bart Ehrman, like Bruce Metzger, as being within a range of 10 to 20 years of the actual events of Christ's resurrection. Okay? Now, I'm just going to read.
Who is it written by again?
It was written by the Apostle Paul.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 1 Corinthians 15 we read, "Now I make known to you, brethren, the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, in which also you stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast, all true, if you hold to the fast to the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received." That phrase there is very important, because he's writing this letter based upon something that he himself has received. So it's prior to him writing this letter. Now, if he's writing between 10 to 20 years, that means what he's about to describe existed before he wrote that. Which means if it's at the earlier date, 10 years of the events, we might be looking at something that was agreed upon within 5 years of them occurring, which I am sure you would agree evidentially is very close to the source. It's an oral tradition.
Right, but he wasn't an eyewitness.
Allow me to finish.
So are you saying that rather than being a legend that came back hundreds of years afterwards?
Allow me to finish. You have said in the absence of evidence, and I am now about to give you evidence to the contrary.
Okay.
So, for I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. Now, the words "and that," which you heard me emphasize as I was reading this text, are unnecessary grammatically in the Greek. He's quoting a creed. The only reason why you would put that and that in the Greek is because what he's doing, he's quoting some kind of pre-existent creed that exists before him, like a PowerPoint presentation. Point 1 and that. Point 2 and that. That's the use of the and that grammatically within the text. So he's quoting a creed that existed before he wrote the letter that we can place to somewhere between 5 and 15 years of the events that they describe. Now, evidentially speaking, who's in the stronger position? Me, who is reading a letter written 10 to 20 years after the events, quoting a creed that is assigned to between 5 and 15 years of the events, or you, who says, in the absence of evidence, we will assume that it's a philosophy made up. Evidentially, who's in a stronger position?
You have much stronger evidence than me. However, on an absolute scale, the evidence that you're presenting is still very weak.
Okay.
And not kind of sufficient to establish a truth.
In a vacuum, what is the strongest force?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
In the vacuum of space, what is the strongest force?
Gravity.
Is gravity considered a strong force or a weak force?
Weak force.
A weak force. So, but in terms of the cosmology of the universe, it is the strongest force despite being the weakest.
Yes, because the random interactions at weaker or with weak forces or strong force or
so my point to you is, in the absence of any other evidence, the evidence that we have is the strongest evidence. And you saying that in some absolute term it is still weak is irrelevant to the historical inquiry, because it might be weak in comparison to, say, the scientific evidence for the way that gravity functions in the universe, that empirical evidence that we have, that we've detailed in countless books and through countless experiments. But in terms of our historical inquiry, we're talking about an event that happened 2,000 years ago where the evidence is clear, unequivocal and strong, because there is no contrary evidence.
So, and there's a few other possibilities.
Go on.
The Muslims will tell you that over 2,000 years the text has changed.
Okay.
It's been corrupted.
And their evidence is what?
My impression is they really do not like Paul.
Yep.
Because
they really don't like Paul.
They point to contradictory passages, but I don't want to go down that line.
Yep. Do you share their agreement that the text has been corrupted so much so that it is unreliable?
Probably not, but
it's a possibility.
It's a possibility.
Okay, so again, we have to base our argument on evidence, not on hypothesis alone. You're allowed to posit whatever hypothesis you like, but I demand of you the same thing that you demand of me. I hypothesize that Christ truly raised from the dead. You demand of me evidence. Fine, I presented some evidence. You come up with a counter theory with equal evidence. Or admit you have no evidence and your position, your philosophies, your hypotheses are all just inventions of your own mind to excuse the fact that you don't want to deal with the evidence that's in front of you.
We've already admitted we don't have any evidence, though.
So on what basis then do you reject the evidence that I now present?
That the evidence is too weak.
Too weak compared to what?
Compared to just a baseline of what's enough to be convincing.
Well, I'm sorry, but there are many people who are convinced by the evidence. You're making a subjective claim, not anything objective.
Well, I have a subjective mind. For
this
to convince me, it has to convince me on a subjective basis.
It does, absolutely. I appreciate that. But what I'm trying to say to you is to present your position as somehow objective.
I'm not.
Well, that's fine. It is a totally subjective. It is a totally subjective position.
I agree.
Yes, thank you. And so what I would say to you, I think you would agree with me that basing our worldview on subjectivity is not the securest grounds upon which to construct a worldview. I know we all operate subjectively. I don't think that there is
outside of physics, there isn't really an objective truth. All of how we come to believe about historical things are based on accounts of it. That is all subjective. If you're trying to say that this happened for fact, you're trying to say this is how we should behave, well, it's all a probabilistic kind of thing. You have to come to our ideals through muddling through things and not knowing exactly what the truth is.
I think, whilst I would love to tackle you on that, that will allow us to get off the evidence that I'm presenting. What reason do you have, other than some subjective feeling, what reason do you have to reject the evidence I've just presented?
I think where I'm coming from is that there are multiple hypotheses.
Yes.
Where that could have been written and nevertheless be false.
Such as?
Such as the text being corrupted.
Evidence.
Such as Paul not being the actual writer of that.
Why does that... Let's address the question of authorship. The authorship is ascribed to Paul. Yeah? Now, often the arguments around authorship are connected to the fact that Paul may not have written the very words as we find them today. And certainly there is evidence that in some of Paul's letters, what we have is really a meshing of more than one letter together. Yeah? But they're both ascribed to being Paul. So some secondary editor comes along, takes two letters that are said to be from Paul, brings them together, and that's how we find them in the Bible. First century concepts of authorship are different from 21st century concepts of authorship.
Yeah, indeed.
They didn't have concepts of copyright back in the first century. So it is using an ahistorical premise to dismiss the historical evidence based upon 21st century rationales.
A perfect example of this: no one denies that Caesar existed. No one denies that he was the emperor of Rome. But they have no reason to deny it. It's written down and it's written.
Never by Caesar.
Peter said, we were eyewitnesses of His Majesty. Apart from Paul. Paul was 40 years after or something, was it?
Yeah. No, well, not actually 40 years.
He's saying 10 years. So
yeah. No. He's not. He's much earlier.
Well, he was written 40 years after.
No, he was earlier. No. So in terms.
But Peter says we were eyewitnesses.
I'm just going to quote that, brother. Yeah. So in 2 Peter, the epistle of 2 Peter, we read. For we did not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is evidence against your theory.
Sorry?
You weren't listening.
No.
So in the second letter of Peter it says, for we did not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is the idea that it's just some cleverly devised philosophy. But we were eyewitnesses of His Majesty. For when He received honor and glory from God the Father, such an utterance as this was made to Him by the majestic glory, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. And we ourselves heard this utterance, made from heaven, when we were with Him on the holy mountain. So we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which you do well to pay attention, as to a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star arises in your hearts. So he's using this analogy of a lamp in darkness. Now, lamps in those days were oil-based wicks. They give off. I don't know if you've ever seen a first century oil-based lamp. No. The light that they give off is incredibly weak and could be beat by a wind-up battery-charged little torch that you attach to your keyring today. But in a dark place, that is the strongest light. It pushes back the darkness around it. And so what Paul is saying to you is that believe upon this testimony because it's eyewitnesses until the fullness of that glory rises up in you to understand. What you have done, on the contrary, is dismiss the evidence that is in front of you because it was written by a community of believers. So you've a priori decided that their commentary is untrustworthy.
That's why I'm agnostic. Taking it with caution.
So,
use your words.
But what is your reason for
I take a great deal of things on caution.
Yeah.
My forefathers have said that this resurrection didn't happen. What we said is we haven't been convinced of it because we don't believe that we can just totally eliminate it. What we're saying is we can't be convinced of it.
And what I'm saying to you is if that you a priori decide that you're not going to deal with the evidence in front of you.
No, what we have decided is that we will take this into consideration, and that's how we can believe that
No, on the
there's
contrary,
a possibility of this.
you might be speaking for yourself, but this man at the beginning of his conversation said that he would only believe what was corroborated by something outside of the text.
Not only, that is the criteria that I'm using to deal with 2,000-year-old texts.
And what I'm suggesting to you is your criteria is flawed. Because what it doesn't do is it has no basis upon which to look at the earliest evidence or multiple sources.
To go back to what I was saying before, taking a great deal of things with caution, I take the same kind of attitude and research when it comes to the claims of Muslims, for example.
Yeah.
Claims of what?
Claims of Muslims. Muslims.
What's that?
Islam.
All right.
And
well, theirs was written. The first record was
Brother,
600 years afterwards.
Yeah, it was. But let him finish what he's trying to say.
Out of interest, why is it that you don't believe claims given by Muslims?
I don't believe in the claims given by Muslims because, firstly, the claims that they make about their own religion can be factually disproven. Evidentially. So Muslims claim that the Quran has never been changed, but yet we've seen here actually at Speaker's Corner 31 different Qurans brought to the corner. With the Muslims claim that it's true. It is true.
Are you talking about translation?
So no, I'm talking about Arabic Qurans.
show me one.
I'm talking about Arabic Qurans. So for example, if you compare, this is for you. If you compare the Hafs Quran to the Warsh Quran and then compare those two Qurans to the Duri Quran, you find that they are textually different. So they are not the same. But Muslims claim that all Qurans in the world are the same. Now, the fact of the matter is
they're allowed to lie. So anyway,
that doesn't stand up to scrutiny. But yet, when I present the evidence for the resurrection to people like yourself, whilst they come up with nice theories, they've never got any evidence. And yet here I am presenting evidence, and they dismiss it for a priori philosophical reasons that are purely subjective assumptions.
No. Do you know what Jesus said about that?
Allow him, brother. Allow him to respond.
He said, even if one was raised from the dead, they will not believe. They will not
allow
believe.
him to respond.
Because man is an outright rebellion against his maker.
Allow him to respond.
All right. If you got 100% belief here, you still won't believe. That's what Christ says.
Sir, brother, will you let him respond, please? Sorry, go on.
Because you've got a vested interest in not believing.
Shall we just move away from this, brother?
No, go on, listen to you.
Yeah. Go on, you were saying.
Okay, so there's because a claim made by Muslims is wrong, you don't believe them in Islam.
I don't believe in Islam because they have made claims that are subject to evidence. And I have tested the evidence of their claims and found them wanting. So they make a claim that all Qurans are the same, but we found evidence of different Qurans. They say the Quran has no contradictions, but we found evidence of contradiction in the Quran. They make claims that are not subject to evidential evidence. And on those claims, it's just a matter of argument and discussion. But in terms of our debate, we're making a claim about what happened in history.
Right.
And what happened in history is subject to evidence.
But you're also making claims about the fact that there's no contradiction in the Bible, for example.
I haven't made that claim. When did I say that?
No contradictions in sources.
Well,
No, I didn't make that claim either.
Why? Which claim did you make?
So the claim that I made was that Christ had risen from the dead. Actually risen from the dead. That was my claim.
Right. And you were saying that what you asked for was counter evidence to suggest that your source was...
What I demanded of you was this. I said that Christ had risen from the dead, and I said I had evidence to that fact.
Yep.
You said, I'm not sure about your evidence, there might be other hypotheses, and you've suggested a few different hypotheses, so then I demanded of you the same thing that you demanded of me, which was evidence. And in each of your hypotheses, you provided zero, zip, nothing. Not a word, not a jot, not a letter.
Yep.
No evidence at all. So what we have is your subjective philosophy versus my evidence. I am in the stronger position. You are in the weaker intellectual position. And the only thing that stops you from coming over is that you want to dismiss my evidence. So then I asked you for reasons to dismiss my evidence, and you still have not provided me with any. So if you're going to follow the evidence, you should become Christians today.
So one of the ways I think is that if I did accept the evidence, that would change a great deal of things in the way I view the world.
Yes.
And that would make me expect a world that's different than the one we have.
I am also in the same world that you are in, and I don't think that me and you are experiencing reality in radically different ways.
Fair. So I'm not disillusional.
So, but what you're suggesting is that by me being a Christian, I am somehow delusional. That's the implication of what you've just said. And I'm not so dumb as not to see it. Now, apart from the fact that that's highly patronizing, which I'm not going to get bent up about, apart from that fact, it's also false. Because I experience the world as you experience it, and yet I am here as a Christian believing Christ rose from the dead.
Yeah, it's not necessarily patronizing. I know a lot of people who believe because of a personal experience with God. I've never had. So they've received a different, or they've seen a different thing than I have.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be patronizing.
Right, but you're still avoiding the point that I've made, which is you have said if I believe what the Bible teaches, then I have to believe in a world that I haven't yet experienced. That was the kind of implication of your argument. But the reality is, I live in the same world that you do. I'm every bit as erudite as you are. I'm every bit as intelligent and cerebral as you are. I experience the world just as you do, and yet I believe. And I believe because the evidence is there to believe.
So do you believe that if everyone were... I don't see how that follows. I mean, it's silly to think that if everyone were of similar intelligence, they would believe the same thing. It's natural to expect people to come to different ideas about the world, isn't it?
Yeah, you're not following this conversation properly. This brother has made the suggestion that if he believes as I believe, he has to believe in a world that is not true to his own experience. And that was what I was arguing against. So now I'll come back to this point. In terms of the Bible and how people interpret the scriptures, the Christian faith has a tradition of interpretation that is 2,000 years old. And this is the guard against the lunatics and the nutjobs who might pick up a Bible and decide that it gives them license to do something bonkers. You know, and that is a danger in religion. If you've got mental health issues and you become religious, it can intensify your mental health issues and make them worse.
You said at the beginning you are a general Christian.
I'm a Christian, yeah.
Christian. Even in Christianity, there are many different interpretations of certain passages.
There is no difference amongst Christians on the fact that Christ rose from the dead. There's no difference amongst Christians that there's only one God. There's no difference amongst Christians that God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. There's no difference amongst Christians that Christ was born of the Virgin Mary. There's no difference amongst Christians that there is one body of Christ. There's no difference amongst Christians that we are baptized for the forgiveness of sins. There's no difference amongst Christians that there will be a resurrection. There's no difference amongst Christians that there's going to be a day of judgment. So the point that I'm making to you is that, yes, Christians have differences about how they believe they should respond to the revelatory event, but there is no difference amongst Christians of the experience of the revelatory event because we have preserved that corporate memory down through 2,000 years.
Yeah, there is a great wealth of commonality.
Yeah.
Indeed.
So what I'm suggesting to you is that 2,000 years ago, a community experienced a revelatory event. They experienced something that happened truly in their lives that were transformative to them.
Right.
And then they spoke of that experience to others. and then others spiritually, not directly, had the same transformative experience. Now, I as a Christian can comment on that because I as a Christian have experienced the same thing. I have had spiritual experiences of the divine. I have had the transformative leavening experience of how Christianity has transformed my life for the better and has corrected me when I've started going wrong, which I do regularly. But I can only claim to believe because others believed. But the thing that you are left to deal with is that very first historical reality, that very first historical experience, which then was later written down in the letters and in the Gospels. And this is important, it was written by different communities independent of one another. The Gospel of Mark was in Rome. The Gospel of Mark was in Rome. The Gospel of Matthew was in Palestine. The Gospel of Luke, we don't know where it was written, but we know it was written in to a Greek audience. And the Gospel of John was on Patmos. Now these
on that point. So the Gospel of John, when do you believe it was written?
Before 90 AD. Before 90 AD.
Okay. The consensus I seem to find when searching online seems to be 90 to 110.
Yeah, and they would all be wrong. And the reason why anyone who says after 90 AD, the reason why we know they're wrong is a couple of reasons. Firstly, the leading figures on this subject, these are the big scholars that lead the world. Bruce Metzger, who's now passed away, is with the Lord, he was a Christian. Bart Ehrman, who himself is a non-believer and apostate, like yourself, someone who doesn't believe, he is someone who also agrees that the entirety of the New Testament was written by 90 AD. The entirety. Okay.
I'll have to do more research.
Yeah, you should. And also, P40, I think it's called P45 or P75, I can't remember, there's so many different P's, is a fragmentary text of the Gospel of John that is being discovered. You can go and see it in Manchester, it's in the library, you can go and look at it with your own eyes. And it has been dated by the experts who date these kinds of things to like 90 AD, well, between 90 AD and 150, which means that the original had to be before that.
About the Gospels being independent documents,
yes.
How do you understand the I think leading theory that I forget which Gospel exactly is. There's an order in Gospels where some are written by deriving a lot of content of previous ones.
Yes.
And rewording it.
Yeah.
I forget exactly how the order works.
Well, there's a theory about the P document. The idea that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John share a similar corpus and lend from one another.
Yes.
And the thing that you've got to understand is that they were written by different authors. So if you look at the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, what he states is that he investigated these things. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of the things accomplished amongst us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses. So what he's saying is, my sources come from the eyewitnesses, and I am now going to write an account based upon that testimony. So to address your point, the reason why the Gospels, despite the fact that Matthew, Mark, Luke and John were all written in different places by different communities, that they all agree, is because their source is the common one that they appeal to, the eyewitnesses.
More than that, though, I looked up a textual analysis of the stylistic similarities between Gospels, and I was pretty convinced of the P theory.
Yeah. But what I'm saying to you is the P theory is the apostles.
Yeah, but
it's their apostolic doctrine. It's their teaching.
But here the turns of phrases are very similar. That are then written down.
Yeah.
Is that like the basic?
In terms of
not quite.
In terms of these, but beyond that, you've also got the letters as well.
Yes.
Because the letters were written independently from the Gospels.
Yes.
but the letters also teach about Christ being risen from the dead, as I gave you 1 Corinthians. Yeah. So what we have is this plethora of material that was written by the first community and their immediate followers, and then was then preserved by the church and much later then compiled into a canon based upon its agreement with this oral interpretation. But my point is, that means that we have independent sources that are very early, that are talking about the event of Christ's resurrection. That constitutes evidence, and in historical terms, that's strong evidence.
So a lot of the letters are written by Paul, who wasn't an eyewitness, but who claims to have had revelation.
Yeah. Go on.
That doesn't strike me as strong evidence.
Now,
at least Paul's letters.
Hold on 1 second, because in Galatians 2, Paul gives an account, and we have no reason to doubt this account, because he's just speaking matter-factually, like I went to the shops. Yeah. Then after an interval of 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem. So this is his second visit to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along also. It was because of a revelation that I went up, and I submitted to them. He's talking about the apostles, the first apostles, the ones who were eyewitnesses. Yeah. I submitted to them the gospel which I preach amongst the Gentiles. But I did so in private to those who were of reputation, for fear that I might be running or had run in vain. So he said he had private meetings with the apostles. He wanted to have them privately to save himself public embarrassment in case it turned out that they would rebuke him and say, you got it all wrong.
These 14 years afterwards.
Hold on 1 second. Or had run in vain, but not even Titus, who was with me, though he was Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. But from those who were of high reputation, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Well, those who were of reputation contributed nothing to me. In other words, they added nothing to what I was preaching. So Paul is testifying to the fact that he goes to Jerusalem, he meets the apostles, he says to them, this is what I've taught, and they don't correct him. They don't say you got anything wrong. They don't say, no, you need to add this, or you need to take this away.
He is rebuked, though, not on that issue, but he is rebuked.
But not on the issue of the gospel, which is the one we're discussing. Right. So again, my evidence is strong, and you have no evidence. And yet, for purely subjective philosophical reasons with no basis in evidence at all, you demand of me extra evidence than the one I'm presenting to you outside of the Bible, when to your counter hypotheses you provide no evidence. Forgive me for saying, but intellectually this is a dubious position to hold. You have to be consistent.
To be able to believe Christianity from a completely historical perspective, you need to have a great deal of knowledge of, for example, the non-Christian sources, the gospel hypotheses, how reliable the text is, whether it was corrupted afterwards. There's a lot of learning and research that needs to go there before you can use that as a sure pedestal, a sure foundation, for your faith.
Well, I think you know that actually, when you look at the testimony of the early church, this is where we go for extra biblical sources. When you look at the writings of the church fathers, from the very earliest period, that virtually every part of the New Testament is being quoted, within 100 years of it being written. By comparison, the later Gnostic Gospels, the later extra non-canonical texts are noted by the patriarchs, are noted by the church fathers in as being new inventions, of being non-historical, as being contemporary to their own time. So they were challenging these things as they emerged.
Would you not be able to explain that by saying that Jesus was more competent at ensuring the integrity of his philosophy than the later guys that wrote the Gospels were?
But again, you have provided no evidence to me that all Christ wrote was a philosophy that would give rise to a later belief in the resurrection. I don't need to deal with your hypothesis until you provide evidence.
Okay.
Can you provide any evidence?
Well, I'm talking less about the resurrection now, and I've moved on to...
I'm still talking about the resurrection, because that's the issue you've got to deal with. You see, let's boil it down, because I've got to go soon, and we should probably wrap this up, because you're shivering, and you probably need a bit of warmth. Yeah? But the point is, if Christ truly rose from the dead, if he truly rose from the dead, then this validates all of my beliefs, and it validates all of my claims, and it validates all of my morality that is based on that event. Yeah? If he didn't rise from the dead, I am wasting my time, and I should go out, get drunk, and get laid. Because if Christ didn't rise from the dead, then there's no resurrection for anyone, there's no judgment, or one of the other religions is true, and I should embrace one of them. You know, or I need to become an agnostic. But if Christ rose from the dead, then you need to become Christians, and you need to come here with me, or get involved in some other Christian community in London, or wherever you live, and get on with doing God's will in the kingdom. This kind of question is the question that defines your life. It gives order to your life. It gives structure to your life. It gives you priorities. It gives you purpose. It gives you meaning. I have presented to you evidence that is historical, that is written within the period of the events. You have given counter-hypotheses with no evidence, and you have given no strong reason for me to dismiss the evidence I have in my hand. A subjective philosophy as yours, I believe, is something that you have absorbed from social conditioning in our society, which is itself agnostic or atheistic, and you've absorbed it unfiltered and uncritically, and this is what has defined you.
As I believe that the Son has risen. Let me think on that. And only will be talking again.
God willing.
Are you here most weeks?
What I can do is I can take your number and I can meet with you outside of the park. For security reasons, though, I will take your number and call you on a withheld number. I would encourage you to understand that our faith can stand up to criticism. That it is intellectually robust. It isn't for dumb people. It is something that we can stand our own against the best of them here, you know, and that actually taking a step in faith is not a step of irrationality, but a step of rationality.
The first time I arrived here, I was a bit more on the Christian side than I am now. And I got surrounded by Muslims who were debating Christianity versus Islam. But we were debating it biblically, basically. And they were coming up with a great many passages and interpretations of those passages that I hadn't come across before. And I did a lot of research following that on those passages. And some of them I found reasons that satisfied me for why those things were in the text.
Are we talking about Christians or the Muslims?
We're talking about the Bible here.
Yeah, but are we talking about the interpretation given by the Christians or the interpretation given by the Muslims?
I was satisfied that the Christian interpretation was solid on the particular issues they attacked me. Mostly, some issues I didn't really find an answer or I wasn't satisfied. But I don't know, I think it would take a great deal of knowledge to be able to defend oneself effectively.
Yes, I think it does take knowledge. Doing apologetics is something that you need to train for. It's not something that you can just do. And unfortunately, and I say this to Christians, there are some Christians, they come here thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to be the next, J. Smith, I'm going to be the next big apologist. And they get absolutely wiped off the floor because they've got enthusiasm without learning. The Christian community in the West at this moment in time has to deal with some big issues within our culture, you know. But and one of them is almost an anti-intellectualism that exists within some churches that think that it's all about preaching noise and loud and powerfully, but without nuance or intelligence or thought.
It's very much not the Catholic Church's way, though.
But the Catholic Church doesn't preach. That's why you don't see Catholic preachers here. And that's,
I mean, 50 years ago you would, but not anymore.
But not anymore, because the Catholic Church has lost its balls. And I'm saying that as someone who really loves the Catholic Church. I really love the Catholic Church. But it's lost its balls and its spine, and it has literally been cut, basically, by liberalism, because it has been unable to separate itself from European history, and so in some ways sees itself as being connected to the developments of Western civilization, when really it needs to disassociate itself and then formulate a grand critique of liberal progressive and liberal thought.
Quick fire question. Do you believe the Eucharist is the actual body of Christ or not?
Do I believe? Yes, I believe in the real presence of Christ's body and blood.
Do you believe in papal infallibility?
Infallibility, no.
No, okay. So you don't believe that... Do you believe in infallibility of Peter?
No, I don't believe that Peter was infallible.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, guys, I've got to go. Please do keep doing your reading. God willing, I will be in touch with you, and I'll speak to you, and God willing, we'll meet again. It's nice to meet you. Having a really pleasant evening. And the thing is, one other thing I would say about this place is, as you can see, Christians are in a minority here.
Yeah.
So,
and they're not very good usually.
Usually, you're right. Most Christians who come here, apart from DCCI, which is a Christian group that comes here, but most Christians who come here are not really good apologists. They just make a lot of noise and then they make Christianity look bad. But this is an environment that's dominated by the Muslim community, and so you're obviously not necessarily going to get a fair and filtered view of what Christians believe in this space.
Are very, very good debaters.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a deficiency of good Christian speakers at Speakers Corner. Absolutely. You know, but hopefully, God willing, if it pleases Him, I've demonstrated that you can intellectually defend the Christian faith. You know, and that's maybe something that we can continue to talk about another time.